Good evening, my little creatures of the night. Mr. Wendigo back again with your late night creature feature. Before we begin, I'm curious. Where are you listening from tonight? Alone in your room? Driving through empty roads? Drop a comment and let me know. I like knowing who's out there in the dark with me. Now then, let's see what tonight's tale brings us. The Debt of Light. Look, 5 in the morning in Manhattan hits different. The city's not asleep. It never really sleeps. But it's quiet in a way that only happens in those stolen hours between the drunks going home and the suits showing up. The garbage trucks haven't started their routes yet. The subway's running, but it's mostly empty cars and the occasional person who fell asleep on the A train and woke up in Washington Heights wondering where their life went wrong. And if you work in one of those glass tower office buildings in Midtown, you get this weird in-between space where the fluorescent lights are on but nobody's around to see them. Just you and the hum and the view and the feeling that you're the last person on Earth, which is either peaceful or terrifying depending on how your week is going. That's when I liked being there. 5 a.m., before the phone started ringing, before the meetings, before Steve from accounting microwaved fish in the break room for the 3rd time that week. I'd started keeping a passive-aggressive log of Steve's fish incidents on a post-it stuck to the inside of my desk drawer. We were at 14. Felis wanted to stage an intervention. I told him interventions were for things like alcoholism and gambling, not tilapia. He told me tilapia at 7:30 in the morning was worse than both. I'm Emerson Gray. People call me Emme. I work for DataBridge Solutions, which is an information exchange business, which is a fancy way of saying we move massive amounts of data between financial institutions and make sure it doesn't get stolen or fucked up in transit. Servers, security protocols, encryption. The kind of work where one mistake costs millions and nobody knows your name until something breaks, and then suddenly everybody knows your name and wishes they didn't. I got there at 5 every morning, had for 3 years, made coffee in the break room on the 14th floor, watched the sun come up over the East River through windows that cost more than my apartment, and I talked to the janitors, Felice and Nigel, 2 guys who worked the graveyard shift, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., 5 days a week. Felice was maybe 50, Dominican, built like a fire hydrant, always had this little battery-powered radio clipped to his belt playing bachata so quiet you could barely hear it unless the building was empty, which at 5 a.m. it always was. He had a daughter named Sophia who was 22 and couldn't decide if she wanted to finish nursing school or drop out to be a backup dancer. And Felis talked about this like it was a hostage situation that he was losing. Nigel was 24, tall, had this way of moving that was careful and deliberate, like he was always aware of exactly where everyone was in the room in relation to him and the nearest exit. I'd noticed that about him the first week. It wasn't paranoia. It was something older than that, something trained into him. We'd gotten into a routine. I'd make coffee, the good stuff I brought from home in a Ziploc bag because the shit the company provided tasted like somebody had filtered hot water through a floor mat, and we'd sit in the break room for 20 minutes before the day shift started filtering in. Just 3 guys drinking coffee in an empty building, talking about nothing important. Felice's daughter. The Mets. Whether the elevator on the south side was haunted or just had bad wiring. Normal stuff. Human stuff. Except that morning, April 16th. I walked into the men's room on the 14th floor at 5:20 and found Nigel standing at the sink, staring into the mirror. Not washing his hands, not fixing his hair. Just standing there, both hands gripping the edge of the porcelain, knuckles pale, eyes locked on his own reflection like he was looking at somebody he didn't recognize. Or somebody he recognized too well and hadn't seen in a long time. Nigel? Nothing. I took a step closer. Hey, you good? His reflection didn't move, didn't blink, but I could see his chest going up and down too fast, breathing like he just sprinted up 14 flights of stairs. Nigel, I put a hand on his shoulder. He flinched, hard, The kind of flinch that comes from a place where unexpected touch meant something bad was about to happen. He blinked, looked at me in the mirror first, then turned his head. "Emme," his voice was rough. "Sorry, I was somewhere else." He nodded, let go of the sink. His hands were shaking. "You want to talk about it?" He looked at me for a long moment. Then he looked back at the mirror. "You ever see something you can't explain? Something that shouldn't exist? Depends on what you mean by shouldn't. I mean impossible. Like the laws of physics took a day off and something else walked in to cover the shift. I'd grown up in Taos, New Mexico. My grandmother used to tell me stories about things in the mountains that didn't follow rules, things that were old when the mountains were young. So yeah, I knew what he meant. Yeah, I took a sip of my coffee. I've seen things. Nigel studied my face, looking for something. Maybe trying to figure out if I was bullshitting him or if I actually understood what it felt like to see something that your brain tells you isn't real but your gut knows absolutely is. "Come on." I stepped back from the sink. "Coffee's ready, and you look like you need to sit down before you fall down." We sat in the break room. Felice showed up a minute later, pushed his cart through the door, saw Nigel's face, and didn't ask questions, just poured himself a cup and sat down. Felice was good like that. He'd been doing this job long enough to know when to push and when to just be in the room. "Bad night?" Felix leaned back in his chair. "Bad memory." Nigel stared at his coffee. Black, no sugar. He held the cup but didn't drink it. "You want to talk about it or you want to sit with it?" Felice leaned back. "Either way's fine." Nigel was quiet for a while, then he set the cup down. "I ever tell you guys how I got to America? You came over when you were 16. I set my cup down. With your mom. That's all I know." That's the short version. He turned the cup in his hands. The real version starts when I was 14. Rwanda, Tutsi rebellion region. You know about the genocide? Some. Felice's voice went quiet. It didn't end clean. Some places stayed bad for years after. My village was one of them. Nigel's jaw tightened. My parents died when I was 12. House fire. Me and my 7 siblings ended up at a school that doubled as an orphanage. About 60 kids total, all crammed into this compound with a handful of teachers who were doing their best to keep everybody fed and alive. He picked up his coffee, didn't drink it, just held it like it was the only warm thing in the room. I was the oldest, 14, so I looked after my brothers and sisters, made sure they ate first, made sure they didn't wander off, made sure the little ones slept. He paused. You do that kind of thing long enough, it becomes the only thing you know how to do. You were a kid yourself. Didn't matter. Someone had to do it. He finally took a sip. One night, 2 groups showed up, armed. Different factions fighting over territory that didn't belong to either of them. They surrounded the compound, started shooting, set fires around the perimeter so nobody could run. Felice crossed himself, whispered something in Spanish. The teachers tried to negotiate. Didn't work. The walls started taking rounds. Cinder blocks cracking. Kids screaming. I grabbed a machete from the kitchen. One of the teachers used it to cut meat for cooking. He stopped, closed his eyes. I went outside. Jesus Christ. I was 14. I had 60 kids behind me and 40 men with guns in front of me. And I swear to God, I don't remember most of it. Just flashes. The weight of the machete. The way it sounded when it hit. The way people fell. Blood on my hands. On my face. On everything. The break room was so quiet I could hear the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. The faint sound of Felice's bachata radio, which he turned down but not off. I thought we were all dead. His voice was flat. Both sides were firing at each other and at us. The fires got closer. The walls were coming apart. But you're here. Because of what happened next. Nigel opened his eyes. A tornado dropped out of the sky. Middle of the firefight. No warning. No clouds building. No wind picking up first. Just this massive column of force that came down with what I can only describe as intent. It didn't wander. It didn't drift. It moved like it was aiming. Picked up armed men from both sides and threw them hundreds of feet. Guns, bodies, everything. Just scattered them like they were paper. I set my coffee down. It didn't touch the school building. Didn't touch a single kid. Just the men with guns. Both groups. When it stopped, everything went quiet. The fires burned out. The wind died. And we saw it. Saw what? A golden orb, hanging in the air where the tornado had been, about the size of a basketball, glowing from the inside, like liquid gold that was also fire, but it didn't give off heat. It just floated there, pulsing, and I heard something. Not words, not a voice, just this awareness, like something enormous was looking at me, seeing me in a way that went past my skin, past my bones, all the way down to whatever part of me isn't physical. Felice's hand went to the cross around his neck. Then it was gone. He looked at both of us. Just faded. The men who were still alive ran, and we were standing in the ruins with no idea what had just happened. The teachers called it a miracle, divine intervention. He looked at both of us. I thought I was just losing my mind. PTSD. A 14-year-old's brain breaking under pressure and making up something beautiful to cover the ugly. For 10 years I told myself it wasn't real. But I keep seeing it. In mirrors, in windows, reflections. That golden light, just for a second, right behind my eyes. And lately it's been getting more frequent, more vivid. He paused, like something trying to remind me it happened, that it was real, that whatever it did for us that night left a mark on me that didn't wash off. The refrigerator hummed. Felice's radio played something soft and sad. The first hint of gray light started creeping across the East River outside the windows. Why now? Nigel's hands tightened on the cup. My mom died 3 weeks ago. Shit. Felice reached across the table and put his hand on Nigel's arm. I'm sorry, brother. She's the one who brought me to America. I thought she'd died in the fire with my dad, but she hadn't. She'd been taken by one of the militia groups, managed to escape years later. Found me when I was 16 through a refugee network, got us both to New York through a church sponsorship program. His voice went rough. She was the toughest person I ever met. Heart attack. 3 weeks ago, the doctor said she didn't suffer. Like that's supposed to help. Where is she now? Felix set his cup down. You have a service planned? That's the thing. Nigel looked at me. She wanted to be buried traditionally, not a Christian funeral. The old way, tribal ceremony. Under the sky, in a place that mattered. You got a place? No, and I've been going crazy trying to figure it out. Can't do it in the city. Can't afford to fly her body back to Rwanda, and I wouldn't even know how to navigate the logistics. She's been sitting in a funeral home in Queens for 3 weeks in a temporary container while I try to find somewhere that feels right. I got a place. Nigel stopped. I got property. Out west. Mountains. It's private. It's beautiful. And it's yours if you want it. Emme, I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm offering. Your mom deserves a proper burial and you deserve to give it to her. So let's do it. Felix nodded. I'll come too, if you want. I'm not letting you two go on some cross-country emotional journey without adult supervision. You're the oldest person here. Exactly. Adult supervision. Your daughter's going to drop out of nursing school while you're gone. She's going to drop out anyway. At least this way I don't have to watch it happen in real time. He looked at Nigel. We're coming. Both of us. End of discussion. Something in Nigel's face cracked, not breaking, opening, like a door he'd been holding shut for 3 weeks finally swinging loose. Thank you. His voice was barely there. When's good? I can take time off. We'll drive out, spend the weekend, do it right. This weekend? This weekend. He nodded slowly. Okay. Yeah. Okay. We finished our coffee. Felix went back to his rounds. Nigel went to mop the 15th floor. And I sat there in the empty break room watching the sun come up over the East River, thinking about my grandmother's property in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. The 40 acres I'd inherited when she died 5 years ago. The place I only visited twice a year because I could never stay longer than a night without feeling like something was standing right behind me, just out of sight, watching me from a place I couldn't turn fast enough to see. My grandmother was a curandera, a healer. She worked with herbs, prayers, rituals that were old when the Spanish arrived. She told me stories when I was a kid, stories about Lechuza, the witch who becomes a giant owl, the guardian of the mountains. She told me our family had a pact with the land, protection in exchange for respect, for keeping the old ways, for remembering. I had thought they were just stories, folklore, something to keep a little kid from wandering too far into the trees. Then I'd spent a night on the property alone when I was 19, about 6 months after she died. I heard things, saw things. An owl sitting on a branch 50 feet up that was bigger than any owl had a right to be. Eyes that caught the moonlight and reflected it back wrong. A voice that sounded exactly like my grandmother calling my name from the clearing, even though she'd been in the ground since October. I'd driven back to Taos at 3 in the morning, doing 80 on a dirt road, and I hadn't spent a full night on that property since. Now, I was about to take 2 friends and a dead woman's ashes up there for a burial ceremony on land that my grandmother had told me every single time I'd asked. Held debts that were older than our family and deeper than the roots of the mountains. I told myself it would be fine. I'm real fucking good at lying to myself. Friday afternoon I loaded the truck, 2012 Ford F-150, extended cab, 215,000 miles, but the engine still ran like it had something to prove. I'd driven it from Taos to New York 3 years ago and it hadn't complained yet, not even through Pennsylvania in February, which is the kind of driving that kills lesser vehicles out of pure spite. Sleeping bags in the back, camping gear, a cooler with food, water, and a 12-pack of Modelo, because Felix had strong opinions about beer, and Modelo was the only thing all 3 of us could agree on. A shovel, and my grandmother's old lockbox from under the seat. The one she'd left me along with the property and the stories and whatever else she'd buried up in those mountains that I'd spent 5 years trying not to think about. Inside the lockbox, a bundle of dried sage, copal incense, a pouch of blue cornmeal, red thread wound tight on a wooden spool, and a black feather that was too big to belong to any bird I'd ever seen in a field guide. Things a curandera passes down to family. Things I didn't fully understand but knew better than to throw away. Nigel met me at my apartment in Queens at 4. He had a duffel bag in a wooden box about 2 feet long, ornately carved with patterns I didn't recognize, his mother's ashes. The funeral home had cremated her and put the remains in something temporary, and Nigel had transferred them to this box. My uncle made it. He set it down carefully, years ago, before everything fell apart. My mom kept it all this time, carried it across 3 countries. It's beautiful. He set it carefully in the back seat like it was made of glass, which, in a way, it was, just not the kind you can see through. Felice showed up 20 minutes later in a Mets cap and a jacket that had survived at least 2 decades and probably a few things it didn't want to talk about, backpack on one shoulder. Rosary beads wrapped around his left wrist. You sure about this? I looked at Felice. It's a long drive. Like, a really long drive. Brother, I've been cleaning toilets in a midtown high-rise for 11 years. A 30-hour drive through the American heartland sounds like a vacation. He tossed his bag in the truck bed. Besides, when's the last time I saw mountains that aren't made of concrete and bad decisions? Fair point. Also, Sophia texted me this morning. She wants to audition for a K-pop dance group. She's Dominican. I'm aware, Emme. I'm painfully aware. We hit the road at 4:30. Friday traffic out of the city was its usual nightmare, bumper to bumper across the GW bridge, but once we cleared the toll and got onto 80 West, things opened up. New Jersey flattened out. Pennsylvania rolled in green and gray. We drove in shifts. Felice first, because he claimed Dominican men were genetically superior drivers and Nigel and I were too tired to argue. Then Nigel through Ohio while Felice slept in the back seat with his mouth open and his Mets cap over his face. Then me, through Indiana and into the dark. Somewhere around Columbus, we stopped for gas and food at a pilot station that smelled like diesel and questionable life choices. Felice ordered a hot dog off the roller grill. That hot dog has been on that grill since the Obama administration, I told him. It's got character. It's got salmonella. Character and salmonella. He took a bite. See? Delicious. Tastes like freedom and regret. Nigel got a coffee and a bag of peanuts and stood outside leaning against the truck, looking up at the sky. There were stars out here, not many, but more than you ever saw in Queens. He stood there for a while, not saying anything, just looking up, and I let him have that. Some things you don't interrupt. We drove through the rest of Indiana and into Illinois. Felice's hot dog sat fine, which he mentioned 3 separate times as evidence that Dominican intestinal fortitude was also genetically superior. Dawn broke somewhere in Missouri, pink and orange sky stretching out over flat land that went on forever in every direction. We stopped for breakfast at a truck stop diner and ate eggs and hash browns cooked by a woman named Patty who looked like she'd been standing at that grill since before any of us were born and had no plans to stop. Kansas took forever. Just flat land and sky and wind turbines spinning in fields like God's lawn ornaments. Felice fell asleep again. Nigel drove and I rode shotgun, and we talked about things that had nothing to do with where we were going or what we were about to do, which was exactly what we both needed. You think Sophia's actually going to audition for that K-pop thing? Probably. She's got the moves. She just doesn't have the… what's the word? Korean? Right. That. Maybe they'll make an exception. For a 5'2" Dominican girl from the Bronx who learned all her choreography from TikTok? Stranger things have happened. Name one. We're driving 30 hours to bury your mother's ashes on haunted mountain property owned by my dead grandmother who talked to owls. Nigel looked at me, looked back at the road. Fair point. Colorado hit late afternoon. The mountains started showing up on the horizon like blue teeth. Got bigger the closer we came. By the time we crossed into New Mexico, the sun was setting behind the Sangre de Cristo and turning every peak the color of old blood. Sangre de Cristo. Felice was awake in the back seat, staring out the window. Blood of Christ. Yeah, Spanish settlers named them that because of the way they look at sunset. Cheerful people, the Spanish settlers. They had a flair for the dramatic. The road narrowed, got steeper. We climbed into the mountains on switchbacks that hugged cliff sides and dropped into nothing on the shoulder side. Trees closed in. Pine and aspen and scrub oak. The air coming through the vents got thinner and colder, even with the heater running. My ears popped twice on the same switchback. We passed through Taos around 8. I didn't stop. Didn't want to. The town was lit up and warm and full of tourists eating green chili enchiladas, and I knew that if I stopped, I'd start thinking about all the reasons not to keep going. My grandmother's property was another 10 miles past town on a dirt road that barely qualified as drivable. I turned off the highway onto a path that was more rock than anything else and felt the truck's suspension complain about every single one of those 215,000 miles. You sure this is right? Nigel leaned forward and peered through the windshield at the darkness and the trees. Because this looks like the opening of every horror movie I've ever seen. It's fine. That's also what they say in every horror movie. He's right, Felice added. Right before the car breaks down and something eats the funny one first. I'm the funny one, by the way. You're the old one. I'm the funny old one, which means I die second. The trees got denser. pressed in close on both sides until the branches scraped the mirrors. I could smell pine and earth through the vents, and underneath that, something else. Something I remembered from being a kid. Not a bad smell, just old. Like the dirt itself had been sitting in the same place for so long it had developed a personality. Then the trees opened up and we were there. 40 acres of mountain land with a view that went forever in every direction that wasn't straight up. The peaks rose behind us, dark against a sky that was more stars than black. The valley spread below like a painting somebody had started and never finished, and in the middle of it all, a small cabin my grandfather had built in the 1960s. 2 rooms, a wood stove, no electricity, a well pump out back. The kind of place that was built by hands that knew what they were doing and hadn't been updated since because nobody saw the need. And a clearing where the aspens grew in a circle. I'd always thought it was just a natural formation. My grandmother told me it wasn't. She told me the trees grew that way because something underneath them wanted them to, and trees are smarter than people give them credit for because they listen to the ground. I parked the truck, killed the engine. For a moment, nobody moved. The silence up here was enormous, not the absence of sound, the presence of quiet, like the mountain itself was holding its breath to hear what we'd say first. It's beautiful. Nigel was looking at the peaks. It was, and it was wrong. I couldn't explain the wrongness. The land looked normal, the sky was clear, the air was clean and cold and exactly what mountain air is supposed to be. But underneath all of it, just below the surface where your conscious mind doesn't reach but your gut never stops paying attention, there was a pressure, a watching. Like something very old and very patient had just noticed that the lights were on and somebody was finally home. Let's get inside. I grabbed the cooler from the truck bed. It's going to get cold fast. We got the cabin livable. I had the wood stove going inside of 10 minutes, the kind of muscle memory you don't lose even after years of not using it. Feliz found the well pump out back and got water running after 3 or 4 tries and a Dominican curse word I'd never heard before but planned to use in the future. Nigel set his mother's box on the table in the main room, centered, careful, and just stood there looking at it. You okay? Yeah, it's real now, you know? The whole drive I could pretend it was just a trip, but we're here, and she's here. And tomorrow, I put her in the ground. Whenever you're ready, no rush. He nodded, stepped outside. I watched him walk toward the clearing where the aspens grew in their circle. The last light was draining off the peaks, and the stars were coming in hard, thousands of them, more than you'd ever see from Queens or Manhattan or anywhere within 100 miles of a streetlight. Nigel stood in the middle of that circle and looked up. And for a second, just a second, I could have sworn the air around him shimmered. Like heat rising off asphalt, except it was 40 degrees and dropping. I blinked. It was gone. Feliz came up beside me in the doorway. You feel that? Feel what? Like something just took attendance. Yeah, I looked at the trees, at the dark between them. I feel it. This place got history, Em. My family's been on this land for generations. My grandmother told me the mountain remembers everything that's ever happened on it. Every ceremony, every prayer, every promise, every drop of blood. That's comforting. She also told me the land holds debts, that people made deals up here a long time ago, and the land keeps the receipts. Feliz touched his rosary beads. Maybe we should say a prayer before we do anything tomorrow. Probably wouldn't hurt. We went inside, ate cold sandwiches and drank Modelo's and talked about nothing important. Feliz told a story about Sophia's last dance recital where she forgot the choreography halfway through and just started freestyling, and the judges gave her higher marks than anyone who'd actually followed the routine. Nigel laughed. It was the first time I'd heard him laugh in 3 weeks, and it sounded like a window opening in a room that had been closed too long. By 10, we were in our sleeping bags. Feliz snored. Nigel stared at the ceiling. I lay there listening to the wood stove tick and the wind press against the walls and that pressure, that watching, settling in around the cabin like snow-filling footprints, Something knew we were here. Something had been waiting. I closed my eyes, told myself it was fine. Told myself my grandmother's stories were just stories and the watching was just nerves, and the shimmering around Nigel was just the altitude playing tricks on eyes that had spent too long staring at computer screens in Midtown. Didn't sleep for a long time. Morning came cold and clear. Sky so blue it looked fake. I got the stove going, made coffee on the camp stove, and stepped outside into air that was sharp enough to cut glass. Felice came out groaning about his back. I'm 50 years old. The ground is not my friend anymore. You volunteered. I volunteered for an emotional journey with my friends. Nobody mentions sleeping on what I'm pretty sure is a rock formation. That's the floor, Feliz. Then your grandfather built the floor out of rocks, which, honestly, respect. Nigel was already in the clearing, standing with his mother's box, just looking at the circle of aspens. The morning light came through the leaves and put gold coins on the ground all around him. We ate granola bars and instant oatmeal, drank coffee, didn't talk much. There's a gravity to what we were about to do that doesn't leave room for small talk. You know how you want to do this? Traditional ceremony, the way my grandmother taught my mother, the way she would have wanted. He looked at me. I'll need to build a fire. Burn specific herbs, say the words. It's not complicated, but it's got to be done right. What do you need from us? Dried sage, tobacco if you have it, something to represent the 4 directions, and witnesses, someone standing with me while I do it. We got sage. I went to the truck, got the lockbox, brought back the sage bundle, the copal, the cornmeal. Nigel looked at the sage, at the copal, then at me. Your grandmother was a healer. Yeah, she knew about things like this. She knew about a lot of things she never fully explained to me, but she left me these, and I think she expected me to figure it out when the time came. Then she probably knew that doing ceremony on land that's already holding spiritual weight might stir things up. I hadn't thought about it that way, but yeah. Performing a burial rite on ground that was already consecrated, already bound up in deals and pacts and promises that went back generations. That was like plugging a new appliance into a circuit that was already running at capacity. Something was going to trip. You still want to do it here? My mom needs to rest somewhere that matters. This place matters. I can feel it. He took the sage. We'll be careful. By noon we were ready. Nigel had arranged stones in a circle in the center of the aspen clearing, placed the wooden box inside, surrounded by the sage and the cornmeal I'd sprinkled at his direction. Phelis stood to the north with his rosary in his hand. I stood to the south with the copal, unlit, waiting. Nigel knelt by the box, opened it, took out a handful of his mother's ashes, held them in his palm. Light the copal. I lit it. The smoke rose thick and white, sweet-smelling, curling up through the still mountain air. Nigel started speaking. Not English, not French. Something older, something from his grandmother's grandmother, words that had weight in them like stones dropped into deep water. His voice was low and steady and the air around him changed, thickened, got heavy the way air gets right before a thunderstorm rolls in. He scattered the first handful of ashes into the stones, spoke more words. The smoke from the copal leaned toward him, which shouldn't have been possible because there was no wind. He took another handful, more words, scattered them. The smoke changed color, went from white to gold, not reflecting sunlight, glowing from inside. Feliz's hand went tight on his rosary. I could see his lips moving. Nigel scattered a third handful and spoke final words, closed the box with the remaining ashes still inside, bowed his head. For a moment, nothing. Then the smoke stopped rising, just stopped, hung there in the air like somebody had pressed pause in the world, a column of gold-white smoke frozen in space, not moving, not dissipating, just there. Felice took a step back. That normal? Nobody answered because nobody knew. The smoke started to condense. pulled in on itself, got denser, brighter, formed a sphere about the size of a basketball. Glowing gold, pulsing with a rhythm that felt like a heartbeat but wasn't any heartbeat I'd ever felt before. It was slower, older, like the pulse of something that measured time in centuries instead of seconds. Oh no. Nigel went pale. It's back. What is it? I couldn't take my eyes off it. The thing was beautiful. Beautiful the way deep water is beautiful when you can't see the bottom. The orb, the same one from Rwanda. It's the same thing. I can feel it. The orb pulsed, and I felt it too. Something looking at me, not at my face, not at my body, deeper. Into the part of me that's tied to this land, to my grandmother, to every promise made on this dirt going back further than I could count. Then it split. The golden light fractured into dozens of smaller lights, each one about the size of a firefly. They spread out through the clearing, moving between the aspens, circling us in patterns that were too coordinated, too deliberate, not random, organized. Like each light knew exactly where it was supposed to be. Those aren't fireflies. No. Nigel stood up slowly. His face had gone gray. They're Adze. The vampire thing? From the stories your grandmother told? It's not a vampire. It's a collector. A debt collector. It takes the form of light, gets inside you, takes what it's owed. He watched the light circle. The orb that saved us in Rwanda. It wasn't a miracle. It was a transaction. And now the bill is here. Hold on. I stepped forward. The lights reacted, several of them drifting closer to me, curious, pulsing brighter when they got near. This is my grandmother's land. She had protections. She had a pact. Something hit me then. Not physically. A thought. A connection firing in my brain that should have fired years ago. My grandmother had a pact. Protection for our family. She dealt with forces she never fully explained to me. What if she dealt with these? What if the Adze weren't strangers to this land? What if my grandmother had invited them in, made a deal, and the price was something she deferred to the next generation? To me, the lights circled tighter. A sound cut through the clearing. Not the wind, not the lights. Wings. Big wings. Beating slow and heavy, displacing air in a way that no normal bird could. I looked up. An owl sat on a high branch at the edge of the clearing, massive, wingspan wider than I was tall. Its feathers were dark, almost black, but they caught the golden light from the Adze and threw it back in colors that didn't exist in nature. Its eyes were amber, clear, ancient. Looking at me the way a grandmother looks at a grandchild who's about to touch a hot stove. La Lechuza. She opened her mouth. Not a hoot. A woman's voice, deep and resonant, carrying across the clearing with an authority that made every one of the golden lights freeze in place. Emerson Gray, you brought ceremony to my land. You cracked the seal your grandmother set, and now the collectors have come. I didn't know. Ignorance is not innocence, but you are blood of blood. My promise to your grandmother holds. She looked at the lights. These things are not welcome here. The Adze lights pulsed in unison, a response, a challenge. They started moving again, faster now, tighter circles, the golden glow intensifying until the whole clearing was lit up like noon. One of them broke from the pattern, dove straight at the cabin, straight at Feliz. Feliz, move. Too late. The light hit his chest, sank in. He went rigid, arms out, rosary swinging from his wrist. His eyes rolled back, then forward. But when he looked at us, the brown was gone. His pupils were glowing gold. Feliz? I stepped toward him. He smiled. Wasn't Felis's smile. Too wide, too knowing. The air, his voice had layers now. Felis's voice on top, and underneath it, something that sounded like 1,000 whispered conversations happening at once. We've waited so long for you to come home. Get out of him. Your grandmother made a promise. Blood of the land, power of the line, passed down, generation to generation, until the debt comes due. He tilted his head. Feliza's head. She paid with borrowed time. You pay with what she borrowed. Nigel grabbed the sage bundle from the ground, still smoking, shoved it at Feliza's face. Feliz screamed, fell back, clawed at his own chest. The golden glow in his eyes flickered like a candle in a draft. The sage smoke wrapped around him, thick, purposeful. Something came out of him, not through his mouth, through his skin. A golden light, squeezing out, fighting the smoke, shrieking in a frequency that I felt in my jaw more than heard with my ears. Feliz collapsed. The light shot upward and rejoined the swarm. I caught Feliz before he hit the ground. His eyes were normal, brown, scared. "What the fuck?" he gasped. "What the fuck was inside me? Something my grandmother invited to dinner and I'm about to uninvite." Lechuza dropped from the branch, landed in the clearing with an impact that shook the ground. Up close, she was terrifying. 7 feet of feathers and fury, with a face that was almost human behind the beak, almost recognizable, almost my grandmother's face if my grandmother had been rebuilt out of midnight and rage. "The sage won't hold them." Lechuza folded her wings. "There are too many. Your grandmother's wards are failing. They've been failing since she died." "Then what do we do?" "You listen." She folded her wings. The Adze light circled at a distance, wary of her, but not afraid, patient. "Your grandmother came to me 50 years ago. She wanted protection for her family. She wanted the land safe. I could give her some of that, but there were threats I couldn't stop. Old things from across the oceans, debts that follow bloodlines wherever they go. So she made a second deal. With them, I looked at the lights. With the collective that wears the firefly shape, the Adze are not from here. They are old, older than my mountains. They travel with the people who carry their stories, cross oceans in the blood of the diaspora. Your grandmother met them on this land because this land sits at a crossroads. African, indigenous, Mexican, Spanish. Every culture that has come through these mountains has left something behind. The Adze found a home here. What was the deal? Protection for your family, real protection, the kind that stops bullets and curses and the slow rot of poverty and bad luck. In exchange, they take from the air, not blood, not life. They take the debt itself, the accumulated spiritual weight of every promise your family has ever made and broken, every prayer unanswered, every oath unfulfilled. They eat it, they consume it. And when it's consumed, they move on. That doesn't sound so bad. It isn't, unless someone performs a ceremony of the dead on consecrated ground and cracks the seal that was keeping the exchange controlled. Then the Adze don't take the debt slowly, over years, digestible. They take it all at once, and the human body is not built to have that much spiritual weight ripped out of it in a single moment. I looked at Nigel. He looked at me. I cracked the seal. Nigel's voice was barely there. "You didn't know?" "Doesn't matter. I did it." Lechuza looked at both of us. "The seal is broken. The Adze are hungry. They will take what they are owed tonight, controlled or not. The question is whether the heir survives the collection. How do I survive it? Your grandmother left you a vessel. Did you never wonder why she was cremated? Why she insisted her ashes stay on this land?" I had wondered, never asked, because asking would have meant admitting that the stories were real and the deals were real and the things in the dark were real, and I'd spent 5 years pretending none of it was. Her ashes are buried under the aspens. I looked at the clearing. In the clearing. In a sealed urn, a binding vessel, your grandmother's final gift. If you open it and add your blood to hers, the collection happens through the vessel instead of through your body. The urn absorbs the debt. The Adze feed from the urn. You survive. What about the mark on me? Nigel stepped forward. The orb in Rwanda. The golden light. If the Adze are the same thing, then they marked me 10 years ago. Lechuza studied him. Her amber eyes moved across his face in a way that made me think she was reading something written on him that the rest of us couldn't see. You were touched by them. In a moment of great violence and great need, they intervened. Saved 60 children. She paused. That was not charity. That was investment. 60 lives preserved, 60 bloodlines continued, 60 future debts to harvest. You are not the debtor. You are the proof that the system works. Jesus Christ. Felix was still on the ground, rosary tight in his fist. But your blood is marked, Lechuza continued, and marked blood is powerful. If you add it to the vessel willingly, it strengthens the binding, makes the containment hold. Then let's dig. The Adze were getting closer. The golden glow was intensifying around the edges of the clearing, pressing inward. The air had that thickness again, that pre-storm density, except the sky was clear and the pressure was coming from everywhere at once. Felix stood up. His legs were shaky, but his jaw was set. What do I do? You don't have to do anything, I told him. This isn't your debt. Brother, something just crawled inside me and wore my body like a rental car. This is personal now. He picked up the shovel from the truck. Where are we digging? We dug, center of the aspen circle. The earth was soft, like it had been waiting to be opened. 2 feet down, I hit metal. A box, old, rusted at the edges. I pulled it out and set it on the grass. Lechuza landed beside it. Your grandmother's vessel. I broke the lock with the shovel. Inside was a clay urn, simple, unglazed, with symbols carved into the surface that matched the ones my grandmother had carved into the cabin doorframe. And underneath the urn, an obsidian knife, black glass blade, leather-wrapped handle. Blood of the land. Lechuza looked at me. Your blood on the urn, then his. She looked at Nigel. Then we seal it, and let the Adze take what they came for. The lights were close now, pressing against the edge of the aspen circle like they were testing an invisible wall. The aspens themselves were doing something. I could feel it. The roots underneath us were humming, vibrating at a frequency just below hearing, and the leaves above were shaking even though there was no wind. Will it work? Your grandmother believed it would. She spent 30 years preparing for this moment. That's not a yes. No, it isn't. I looked at Nigel, at Felix, at the urn in my hands and the knife beside it, and the golden light circling, and the 7-foot owl witch standing in my grandmother's clearing telling me to bleed. Fuck it. I picked up the knife. Let's go. I picked up the knife. The obsidian was cold, colder than the air, colder than the ground, cold like it had been sitting at the bottom of something deep for a very long time. I cut my palm, deep enough to bleed freely, shallow enough to still use my hand. The blood ran hot and red over the clay urn, found the carved symbols, filled them. The urn drank it. I could feel it pulling, drawing the blood in, hungry for it in a way that made my stomach turn. Now you. I handed the knife to Nigel. He took it, cut his own palm without hesitating, held his hand over the urn. His blood hit the clay, and the reaction was immediate. The urn glowed, not gold like the Adze, white. Clean and bright and old. The symbols on the surface lit up one by one until the whole thing was shining in my hands like a lantern made of bone. The Adze reacted. Every light in the clearing flared at once. The swarm contracted, then expanded, then rushed at us from every direction. Lechuza spread her wings and screamed. Not the owl's cry, the woman's voice underneath, ancient, territorial, raw. The sound hit the Adze lights like a physical force. Some of them shattered, others recoiled, but there were too many. They poured past her, through the aspen circle, into the clearing. They hit me. I felt them slam into my chest, my arms, my face, felt heat and pressure and something trying to claw inside my head. Felt my grandmother's blood in the urn pushing back. Felt the land underneath me pushing back. Felt every prayer my grandmother had ever said on this dirt rising up through the roots and the rock and the soil to hold the line. And then I was somewhere else. Not the clearing, not the mountain, somewhere older. A place that was all light and no shape, all sound and no source. My grandmother stood in front of me, young, maybe 30. Her hair was black and her eyes were bright and her hands were covered in symbols drawn in something that wasn't quite paint and wasn't quite blood. "Mijo," she smiled. "You found it. Abuelita, what did you do?" "What I had to. The Adze were already here when I came to this land. Old debts from old crossings. African, Mexican, indigenous, all tangled together in the dirt. I couldn't drive them out, so I made a deal. Controlled feeding, manageable extraction, payments spread across generations so no single person carried the full weight. The seal broke. Yes, because your friend's ceremony was powerful. His mother's ashes, his grief, his voice speaking words from another continent on ground that was already holding 100 years of promises. It was too much energy for the seal. It cracked. She looked at me with eyes that were sad and proud at the same time. But the vessel holds. Your blood and his blood together on my ashes. That's the binding I designed. That's what I spent 30 years building. Will it hold? If you let it, don't fight the extraction. Let the Adze take what they're owed from the urn. Let the vessel do its work. It will hurt, not your body, something deeper. You're going to feel every debt this family has ever carried, all at once, like a lifetime of pain compressed into a single moment. But it won't kill you. I made sure of that. How? Because I'm in the urn too, mijo. My ashes, my power, my love. She smiled. I'm the cushion between you and the weight. That's what grandmothers are for. The vision broke. I was back in the clearing, on my knees, the urn clutched to my chest. The Adze lights were everywhere. Inside the urn's glow, on my skin, in the air, they were feeding. I could feel it. Not pain exactly, more like pressure. Like something enormously heavy being lifted off my shoulders that I hadn't known I was carrying, except the lifting itself was the hard part, like ripping duct tape off a wound that had been covered for years. The urn pulled them in. One by one, the lights were drawn down into the clay, into my grandmother's ashes, into the binding. Each one that went in made the urn glow brighter and the weight on my chest lighter. Nigel was beside me. His hand was bleeding onto the urn, feeding the binding. His jaw was locked and his eyes were closed, and I could see veins of golden light running under his skin where the old mark from Rwanda was reacting, amplifying, turning his blood into a conduit that pulled the Adze in faster. Felice stood over both of us with the shovel raised like a baseball bat, ready to swing at anything that came too close. His rosary beads dangled from his wrist and caught the light in a way that was probably beautiful if you had time to notice, which nobody did. Lechuza circled overhead. She was picking off the lights that tried to escape, catching them in her talons, driving them back toward the urn. Her wings cut the air with a sound like sheets snapping on a clothesline, and every time she screamed, the Adze flinched. The orb reformed. The remaining lights pulled together, desperate, trying to consolidate their strength. It hung above the clearing, pulsing, furious. The debt is owed. The payment is insufficient. We will take what is promised. I stood up, held the urn above my head. My grandmother's voice was in my blood, in the clay, in the carved symbols that were now blazing white-hot under my fingers. She already paid. I held the urn high. 30 years of protection, 30 years of controlled feeding, and you took every bit of it. The deal is done. The debt is settled. Now get in the fucking jar. The orb shuddered. Lechuza dove, hit it from above with both talons extended. The orb cracked. Golden light sprayed outward. Nigel pressed both hands against the urn. His blood and mine mixed on the clay. The binding flared. The urn pulled, hard, like a drain opening at the bottom of a bathtub. Every fragment of golden light in the clearing, every last spark and firefly flicker of the Adze collective was sucked inward. The orb fought it, resisted, strained against the pull like a fish on a line. Felix stepped forward, put his hand on the urn too. No blood, no mark, just a 50-year-old Dominican janitor with a rosary and a stubborn streak, adding his weight to the line. In the jar, Felix stepped forward. Now, the orb broke. The last of the golden light spiraled down into the urn. The clay sealed itself. The symbols went dark, and the clearing went silent. Real silence, not the watching silence from before, the kind of silence that happens after a storm passes and the world is still catching its breath. I put the lid on the urn. My hands were shaking so bad I nearly dropped it. Lechuza landed beside me, put one talon gently on the lid, spoke words in a language that was older than Spanish, older than English, maybe older than any language anyone still living had ever heard. The urn sealed. The golden glow faded to nothing, and the mountain exhaled. I buried the urn back where I'd found it, 6 feet down, covered it with earth and stones, carved one of my grandmother's protection symbols into a flat rock and placed it on top. I don't know if you can hear me. I knelt by the hole, to the land, to whatever was listening. But thank you, for the vessel, for the plan, for spending 30 years getting ready for the worst day of my life. The wind picked up, warm, like a hand on my cheek. We buried Nigel's mother's remaining ashes in a spot he chose near the edge of the property, where the view stretched out over the valley and the morning sun would hit first. Felix read a prayer in Spanish. Nigel spoke words in his grandmother's language. I stood there with dirt under my fingernails and blood drying on my palm and said nothing because sometimes the best thing a witness can do is just be there. We drove back to Taos that afternoon, found the hospital. I had a gash on my back from where I'd fallen on a rock during the binding, and Nigel's hand needed stitches. Felix had bruises on his chest that the doctor couldn't explain and didn't try to. Hiking accident, I told the intake nurse. She looked at the three of us, one guy with a slashed palm, one guy with a back wound, one guy with chest bruises in the shape of fingers, all covered in dirt and dried blood and sage smoke. Must have been some hike. You have no idea. We got a motel room, showered, ate gas station burritos because the diner was closed and the only other option was a Subway that looked like it had given up on life sometime around 2015. Felix ate his burrito in 4 bites. You know what the worst part is? The supernatural vampire fireflies that possessed you? No, the worst part is that I'm going to have to lie to Sophia about this trip. She already thinks I'm boring. If I tell her I fought ancient West African light spirits on a mountain in New Mexico with a giant owl in a clay jar, she's going to have me committed. Just tell her it was a spiritual retreat. A spiritual retreat where I got possessed. Leave that part out. Leave out the only interesting thing that's happened to me in 11 years? Yes. Fine, but I'm telling my priest. Don't tell your priest, Felix. I'm telling my priest. We left New Mexico 3 days later. Nigel was quiet but lighter. Something about him had shifted. Not the mark. That was still there. I could see it sometimes, a faint shimmer behind his eyes when the light hit right. The ghost of the golden glow that had been put there in a burning compound in Rwanda by something that saved 60 children and called it an investment. But the weight was different now. He'd buried his mother. He'd said the words. He'd bled into a clay urn on a mountain and helped seal something ancient back into the dirt. There's a kind of peace that comes from doing the thing you were afraid to do, even if the thing turns out to be weirder and more terrifying than you ever imagined. We drove home through Kansas, which still took forever. Through Missouri, and Illinois, and Indiana, and Ohio, and Pennsylvania, and finally, the skyline of Manhattan rising out of the haze like a middle finger pointed at the sky. Back to the city, back to the building, back to 5 a.m. in the break room on the 14th floor. I made coffee. Felix pushed his cart in. Nigel finished mopping. We sat in our usual spots and drank from our usual mugs and looked at each other across the table like three people who'd been through something together that they'd never be able to explain to anyone else and didn't need to. So, Felice took a sip. Same time tomorrow? Same time tomorrow. Good. He took a sip. Steve microwaved fish again while we were gone. I can still smell it. I'm updating the log. We're at 15 now? 15 confirmed incidents. At what point do we go to HR? 20. 20 is the line. You're too patient, Emme. I sealed an ancient debt into a clay urn with my blood and the help of a 7-foot owl. I think I can handle Steve's tilapia. Nigel laughed. Felix laughed. I laughed. Normal things. Human things. But sometimes, when I get to the building early, before the lights are on, before anyone else is there, I catch my reflection in the dark windows on the 14th floor. And just for a second, just long enough to wonder if I imagined it, I see something behind my eyes. Not gold, not the Adze, something else. White light, my grandmother's light. The light she left in the urn and the urn left in me. A piece of her magic that settled into my blood when the binding took hold and decided to stay. It doesn't scare me. It feels like being watched by someone who loves you. It feels like protection. It feels like a grandmother who spent 30 years planning for the worst so her grandson could survive it. I go back to the property twice a year now, clean the cabin, check the urn, make sure the stone is in place. I leave sage and cornmeal at the base of the aspens. I sit in the clearing and listen to the mountain breathe. Lechuza comes sometimes, sits on her branch, watches me with those amber eyes. We don't talk. We don't need to. We have an understanding. She guards the land. I keep the seal. The Adze stay in the jar. The deal is done. The debt is paid. The urn holds. At least for now. But some nights, when the wind comes through the mountains just right, I can feel it, down in the ground, down where my grandmother's ashes sit wrapped around a sealed jar full of golden light, a pulse. Slow, patient, like something very old, counting the days until the next crack in the seal. Well, boys and ghouls, that wraps up another terrorific tale from the vault. Poor old Emme. Thought he was just helping a friend bury his mama. Thought he was being a good guy. A road trip, some beers, some feelings. What could go wrong? Well, turns out old Granny made deals with things that don't die, and the bill collector doesn't care that you didn't co-sign the loan. Now Emme drives out to that mountain twice a year to check on a clay jar full of angry golden light. And the only thing standing between the world and whatever the hell is in that urn is some carved rocks and an owl the size of a Buick. What a mindfuck, huh? Just how we love it. Hit that subscribe button. New creature features drop every day at 8 p.m. Central, and trust me, tomorrow's even nastier. Leave a like if this one made you think twice about your family's old promises. Drop a comment. Where are you watching from tonight? You ever inherit something from a grandparent that you didn't quite understand? You ever see lights in the mountains that moved with a little too much purpose? I'm always hunting for the next nightmare. Until next time, keep your fires burning and your eyes on the trees. This has been your late night creature feature. I'm Mr. Wendigo. And remember, some debts follow you across oceans. Some miracles come with interest, and grandmothers out there, plan ahead, even from the grave. Especially from the grave. Sweet dreams, kiddies. Sweet dreams.